The wind moves through Kerugordo like a slow exhalation. At 500 feet above sea level, perched on the western slope of the Inyo Mountains, the ghost town clings to its precarious elevation with the grip of something that refuses to completely disappear. 20 weathered structures remain from what were once 400. The American Hotel, rebuilt after burning in 2020, stands as a sentinel over empty streets where wooden sidewalks have collapsed into dust. The Belshaw House, dating to 1868, leans slightly to one side, its windows like hollow eyes watching the valley far below. This is a place of profound silence now. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, the kind that rings in your ears. But stand here long enough and you can almost hear it. The thunder of smelter furnaces, the crack of gunfire that killed at least one man every week, the grinding of wagon wheels carrying silver down the yellow-grade road, the shouting of 4,700 souls who believed, however briefly, that they had found the American dream on a mountain the Mexicans called Fat Hill, Cerro Gordo. The name sounds almost gentle, poetic even. It was anything but. Between 1865 and 1879, this remote peak produced enough silver to build a city, not just any city, Los Angeles. Without Cerro Gordo's mines, the City of Angels would have remained a dusty pueblo of 5,000 people, forgotten on the map of westward expansion. The Los Angeles News wrote in 1872 that Cerro Gordo was the silver cord binding the city's very existence, and that if it were severed, Los Angeles would inevitably collapse. Today, both Cerro Gordo and Los Angeles still exist, but only one of them is alive. How did this happen? How did a mountain that once held dominion over an entire region's economy become a graveyard of rusted machinery and splintered wood? How did the largest silver producer in California become a place where 30 Chinese miners still lie entombed in collapsed tunnels, their bodies never retrieved? And what does this forgotten empire tell us about the American economy, about the workers who built it, and about the price we paid for progress? If you enjoy deep investigations into America's forgotten cities, ghost towns, and lost empires, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which place to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. To understand Cerro Gordo, you have to understand 1865. The Civil War had just ended. The nation was shattered, its economy uncertain, its future unclear. The gold rush of 1849 had transformed California, but by the 1860s the easy surface gold was gone. Men who had come west seeking fortune found themselves broke, desperate, searching for the next big strike. The Inyo Mountains of eastern California were forbidding territory, remote, brutal. Sitting between the highest point in the contiguous United States, Mount Whitney, and the lowest point, Death Valley, this region represented extremes. Summer temperatures reached 120 degrees. Winter snowstorms buried the landscape. Water was scarce, timber even scarcer. The land itself seemed designed to repel human presence. But beneath that hostile surface lay one of the richest silver deposits in North America. Mexican miners knew this. They had been exploring the area since the early 1860s, calling the mountain Cerro Gordo, Fat Hill, for its rounded summit. They worked in small groups, using primitive adobe ovens to smelt surface ore, extracting silver through nothing but hand labor and centuries-old techniques. The ore was remarkably pure, easier to process than the complex silver found in Nevada's Comstock lode, richer than almost anything discovered in California. But the Mexicans worked quietly, cautiously. They had reason to be afraid. Indigenous Paiute people had lived in the Owens Valley for thousands of years. To them, these mountains were sacred land, burial grounds, sites of spiritual significance. When they saw Mexican miners trespassing, they responded with violence. In one attack, 3 of 5 prospectors were killed. The remaining 2 were held captive and released only after promising never to return. It was a promise that would not be kept. In 1863, Fort Independence was established nearby. Its purpose was clear: to pacify the indigenous population and open the region to white and Mexican settlement. That same year, 35 Paiute Indians were chased down the mountain into Owens Lake by soldiers and massacred as they tried to swim away. The genocide continued. California's first governor, Peter Hardeman Burnett, had openly called for the extinction of native peoples and offered bounties for scalps. By 1890, California's indigenous population had been reduced by 90%. This is the foundation upon which Cerro Gordo was built. Not just rock and ore, but blood. Pablo Flores made the first significant discovery in 1865, finding rich veins of silver near the summit of Buena Vista Peak. He began mining and smelting operations immediately. Word spread slowly at first. The location was too remote, the terrain too harsh. But by 1867, dozens of prospectors had arrived, each hoping to claim their piece of the fat hill. What they found exceeded imagination. Assays showed ore worth at least $300 per ton. In some veins, the silver was so concentrated that miners could extract it with nothing but hand tools. This was not just a good strike. This was a bonanza. But silver alone does not make an empire. For that, you need infrastructure. You need capital. You need men willing to risk everything for the promise of wealth. Victor Baudry was one of those men. A French-Canadian businessman operating out of nearby Independence, Baudry recognized what the Mexican miners had found. He opened a store near the mines in 1866, selling supplies to prospectors at inflated prices. When miners couldn't pay, he accepted mining claims as collateral. Within months, Baudry owned partial interest in some of the richest mines on the mountain, including the Union Mine, which would become the most productive silver operation in California. Baudry built 2 modern smelters to replace the crude adobe ovens. He brought in experienced metallurgists. He transformed Kerugordo from a collection of desperate men digging holes into an industrial operation capable of processing tons of ore per day. But Victor Baudry was not the man who would define Cerro Gordo. That distinction belongs to Mortimer Belshaw. Belshaw arrived in April 1868, drawn by reports of the extraordinary silver deposits. He had experience with silver mining in Mexico and understood immediately what Cerro Gordo lacked: efficient transportation. The mountain sat at 500 feet elevation, nearly 2,000 feet above the valley floor. There was no road capable of handling heavy freight. Silver ore had to be carried down by mule on treacherous trails. It was slow, expensive, limiting. Belshaw saw the problem and saw the solution. He secured financing from San Francisco investors, acquiring a third interest in the Union Mine and enough capital to begin construction of the first real wagon road up the mountain. He supervised the work personally, cutting through yellow rock that gave the road its name, the Yellow Grade. When completed, the road made it possible to move tons of processed silver down the mountain in heavy wagons. But Belshaw did not build the Yellow Grade out of generosity. He operated it as a toll road, controlling all shipments of silver from the mountain. Every ingot that left Cerro Gordo put money in his pocket twice, once from the mine, once from the road. By December 1868, silver shipments were reaching Los Angeles regularly. By 1869, Cerro Gordo was being compared to the Comstock lode of Nevada. The bonanza had officially begun. What drove these men? What made them risk capital, reputation, and life itself on a mountain that offered no guarantees? It was not just greed, or rather, it was not greed alone. For men like Baudry and Belshaw, silver represented something deeper: legitimacy, power, the ability to shape the world according to their vision. In the rigid class structures of the mid-19th century, mining offered one of the few paths from nothing to everything. A man could arrive in California with empty pockets and leave a millionaire. He could go from nobody to senator, from laborer to landowner, from obscurity to legend. This was the promise of Cerro Gordo. Not just wealth, but transformation. And for a brief, violent moment, the promise seemed real. Constructing an empire on a remote mountain required more than ambition. It required infrastructure on a scale most people could barely imagine. First came the roads. The Yellow Grade, cutting up the mountainside in sharp switchbacks, was just the beginning. From Cerro Gordo, Silver had to travel 275 miles to Los Angeles across some of the most hostile terrain in North America. Desert valleys where summer heat killed pack animals, mountain passes blocked by winter snow, dry stretches with no water for 50 miles. The route passed through places with names like Coyote Holes, Cow Holes, Barrel Springs, names that spoke of desperation and survival. Remy Nadeau, a French-Canadian freighter, built the transportation network that made Cerro Gordo possible. He pioneered the use of 20 mule teams to pull massive freight wagons loaded with silver ingots. Each wagon carried up to 6 tons. Each trip took 22 days round trip. Nadeau's freight company moved so much bullion that he is credited with making Los Angeles a viable city. Without his mule teams, the silver would have been worthless, trapped on a mountain with no way to reach markets. The economic relationship was symbiotic. Los Angeles needed Cerro Gordo's silver. Cerro Gordo needed Los Angeles as a shipping point to San Francisco. When freight rates were disputed in 1871 and Nadeau's company briefly diverted the silver trade to other ports, Los Angeles businessmen panicked. The Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce was literally founded in a judge's courtroom during an emergency meeting to resolve the crisis and bring the silver back. This was America's extraction economy in miniature. Cities existed to serve mines. Mines existed to serve markets. Workers existed to serve both. Everything else was secondary. On the mountain itself, construction was constant. The Union Mine tunneled deeper into the rock, following veins of galena ore rich with silver and lead. Eventually, more than 30 miles of underground passages would honeycomb Cerro Gordo. Workers drilled by hand, setting charges of black powder, hauling debris in wooden carts. The tunnels were dark, cramped, and airless. Men worked 12-hour shifts by candlelight, breathing rock dust, sweating in the heat generated by hundreds of bodies and gunpowder explosions. Above ground, smelters transformed ore into pure metal. The furnaces ran day and night, fed by wood hauled up from the Sierra Nevada forests, 70 miles away. The smelting process was brutal. Workers fed ore into blast furnaces heated to thousands of degrees. Lead and silver melted and separated. Slag was poured off. Ingots were cast. Every step released toxic fumes. Every step demanded precision. A single mistake could ruin an entire batch or kill the men operating the equipment. Water was the limiting factor in everything. Cerro Gordo had no natural springs. Every drop had to be hauled up the mountain by mule train from sources 6 miles away. The Cerro Gordo Water Company was formed specifically to pipe water from Miller Springs, but the springs could barely keep pace with demand. Miners needed water. Smelters needed water. Residents needed water. When Miller Springs dried up in 1875, it nearly killed the town immediately. The forest was stripped bare. Pinyon and juniper that had grown for centuries were cut down and converted into charcoal to fuel the smelters. This angered the Paiute, for whom the trees held spiritual significance. But anger did not stop the axes. By the mid-1870s, the Inyo Mountains were nearly barren, and wood had to be imported from ever more distant sources. Who did this work? Who actually built Cerro Gordo? Not the men whose names appeared on mining company letterheads. Mexican miners worked the earliest excavations, bringing with them knowledge passed down through generations. Chinese laborers arrived by the hundreds, willing to work for lower wages than white miners. They dug tunnels, hauled ore, built structures, and cooked meals. When a tunnel collapsed in the 1870s, trapping 30 Chinese workers underground, no one went down to retrieve the bodies. The mine simply moved operations to a different shaft. The Chinese miners remain entombed to this day. European immigrants came seeking opportunity. French Canadians, Irish, Germans, Cornish miners with expertise in hard rock extraction. They brought skills. They brought labor. They brought desperation. Most would leave poorer than they arrived. Life for workers at Cerro Gordo was short and brutal. 12-hour shifts were standard. Accidents were common. Cave-ins, explosions, falls, equipment failures. Men died weekly, and not just from mining. The town had no church, no school, no real law enforcement. Violence was endemic. This was not an accident. This was the design. Cerro Gordo was built as an extraction site, not a community. Its purpose was to produce silver as efficiently as possible and ship it to markets that would convert it into capital. The welfare of workers was never part of the equation. When men died, they were replaced. When wages needed to be cut, they were cut. When conditions became unbearable, workers could leave or accept them. There was always another desperate man waiting to take their place. By 1871, Cerro Gordo was booming. More than 1,500 people filled the camp. Buildings were going up as fast as materials could be supplied. The American Hotel opened, advertising itself as the finest accommodation east of the Sierra Nevada. 7 saloons served whiskey to miners flush with silver. 3 brothels provided companionship. A general store sold everything from dynamite to canned peaches at prices inflated by the cost of freight. But beneath the activity, beneath the noise and dust and ambition, a question lingered. How long could this possibly last? Between 1871 and 1875, Kerugordo represented everything Americans believed about themselves. That hard work paid off. That natural resources were infinite. That any man could strike it rich if he had the courage to try. At its peak, the town produced 18 tons of silver-lead bullion daily. Smelters ran continuously. Freight wagons rolled down the yellow grade in an endless procession, carrying ingots worth thousands of dollars each. Nadeau's mule teams made the journey to Los Angeles and back, returning with supplies and mail. The stagecoach arrived 3 times a week, bringing newspapers, letters, and newcomers hoping to find work or fortune. The social structure of Cerro Gordo mirrored the economic structure. At the top sat men like Victor Baudry and Mortimer Belshaw. They lived in substantial homes with multiple rooms, furnishings shipped from San Francisco, servants to cook and clean. Belshaw's house, built around 1868, still stands today, one of the oldest structures in the town. These men dined on imported delicacies while miners ate beans and salt pork. Mine superintendents and smelter foremen occupied the middle tier. They had steady salaries, better housing than common workers, and authority over the men below them. They were the interface between capital and labor, responsible for maximizing production while minimizing costs. It was not a comfortable position. Miners hated them for enforcing brutal work schedules. Owners blamed them when production fell short. Below them came skilled workers, blacksmiths who kept equipment functional, carpenters who built structures, assayers who tested ore quality. These men earned better wages than common miners and had marginally better working conditions. They represented the closest thing Cerro Gordo had to a middle class. At the bottom were the laborers, the men who actually dug the silver from the ground. They worked 12-hour shifts for $3 a day, good wages by the standards of the time, but barely enough to survive given the inflated prices in the company store. They lived in cramped bunkhouses or tents, slept on rough bunks, owned almost nothing. Many sent money home to families they would never see again. Many died in the mines before they could save enough to leave. And below even them, in a category that barely registered in the social hierarchy, were the Chinese workers. They earned less than white miners, lived in segregated areas, faced discrimination and violence. When they died, their deaths went unrecorded. They existed to provide labor at the lowest possible cost, nothing more. For those at the top, life in Cerro Gordo was an adventure, a story they would tell for decades. Baudry and Belshaw entertained visitors in their homes, discussing mining techniques and market prices over cigars and brandy. They spoke of expansion plans, new tunnels, improved smelting technology. They saw themselves as pioneers, building civilization in the wilderness. For those at the bottom, life was survival. Men slept surrounded by sandbags because stray bullets from saloon fights regularly penetrated tent walls. They worked until their bodies broke, drank to numb the pain, fought over perceived slights because violence was the only power they possessed. A doctor arrived in Cerro Gordo briefly, but left when he realized the town was too dangerous. Men died from infected wounds that would have been treatable anywhere else. The violence was extraordinary even by frontier standards. At least one murder per week was the norm. Gunfights broke out over card games, mining claims, women, or simply because men were drunk and angry. There was no jail, no official law enforcement. Vigilante justice prevailed, which meant that disputes were settled by whoever had more guns and friends. The most infamous murder occurred on December 29, 1892. William Crapo, a French-Canadian engineer and former postmaster, shot and killed the new postmaster Henry Boland and a friend during an election dispute. Crapo fired from his house next to the American Hotel as the two men walked past. A posse from Keeler, the town at the base of the mountain, came looking for him the next day. The bounty on Crapo's head was $500. He was never found. But for most of the early 1870s, the violence was background noise, unpleasant but manageable. The real focus was silver. By the end of 1869, more than 340 tons of silver bullion had been shipped from Cerro Gordo to Los Angeles. The economic impact was staggering. Los Angeles transformed from a sleepy pueblo into a commercial hub. Banks opened, businesses expanded, real estate values soared. The Los Angeles News did not exaggerate when it said the city owed its existence to Cerro Gordo. In the mines themselves, the Union mine drove deeper into the mountain, following veins of galena ore that seemed inexhaustible. Miners spoke of ore bodies so rich that you could almost carve silver with a knife. Assayers reported consistent results, $300 per ton, sometimes more. The money flowing from Cerro Gordo seemed as eternal as the mountain itself. But there were signs, small signs, warning signs. The easy surface ore was gone by 1872. Miners had to dig deeper to maintain production levels. Deeper tunnels required more ventilation, more shoring, more time, more labor. Costs increased. The wood supply diminished. Every tree within reasonable distance had been cut down. Wood prices rose as freight distances increased. Water became scarcer. Miller Springs produced less each year. The cost of hauling water up the mountain cut into profit margins. And most concerning, though few spoke of it openly, the ore quality was declining. Not dramatically, not enough to cause panic. But the trend was clear to anyone paying attention. The richest veins were playing out. The mountain was not infinite after all. Still, in 1873 and 1874, these seemed like manageable problems. Technical challenges that could be solved with better engineering or more investment. Cerro Gordo had survived worse. It would adapt. It would endure. That belief lasted until 1875. Then everything fell apart. The collapse of Cerro Gordo was not a single catastrophe. It was a cascade of failures, each feeding the next, until the entire system imploded. It began with water. In August 1875, Miller Springs dried up, not gradually, not with warning. 1 month the springs produced enough water to supply the town. The next month they were gone. The cause was likely overuse. Years of constant extraction had depleted the underground aquifer faster than it could recharge. But the reason did not matter. Without water, the smelters could not operate. Without the smelters, ore could not be processed. Without processing, the mines were worthless. The Cerro Gordo Water Company scrambled to find alternative sources. They hauled water up the mountain by mule train, an expensive and insufficient solution. They drilled new wells. They explored other springs. Nothing produced enough volume. For weeks the furnaces sat cold. Silver ore piled up, waiting for water that would not come. Then came the financial crisis. In the summer of 1875, a massive stock bubble involving silver mining companies in Virginia City, Nevada, burst. The collapse rippled through California's economy like a shockwave. Banks failed, businesses closed, investors panicked. One of the primary speculators, Elias Lucky Baldwin, sold millions of dollars in mining stock and fled to Los Angeles, where he invested in real estate, including the Rancho Santa Anita in the San Gabriel Valley. The Temple and Workman Bank, which had financed much of Cerro Gordo's infrastructure through loans secured by silver production, suddenly faced a depositor's run. People wanted their money. The bank did not have it. The bank had invested it in Cerro Gordo, in Los Angeles real estate, in railroads and businesses that could not be liquidated quickly. Within days, the bank collapsed. The financial network that sustained Cerro Gordo's operations disintegrated. At the same time, the Los Angeles freighting route broke down. Nadeau's company could not maintain its delivery schedule because there was not enough bullion to transport. The economic system that had sustained Los Angeles for 5 years began to fail. Businesses dependent on the Cerro Gordo trade laid off workers. Warehouses sat empty. The city that had proclaimed itself bound to Cerro Gordo by a silver cord now discovered what happened when that cord was cut. On the mountain, conditions deteriorated rapidly. By March 1878, miners' wages were reduced from $3 to $2.50 per day. Half the workforce left immediately, heading to more promising camps. The men who remained worked shortened shifts at reduced capacity. Production fell, revenue fell, the debt accumulated. Then in 1877, fire swept through the Union Mine. It started deep underground, possibly from a candle or lantern. In the dry, oxygen-starved tunnels, fire was the ultimate nightmare. Wooden supports ignited. Smoke filled the passages. Men fled to the surface, leaving tools and equipment behind. The fire burned for weeks, consuming timber, destroying infrastructure, filling shafts with smoke and gas that made them unusable. The mine owners repaired what they could. They brought in new timber, cleared damaged sections, attempted to resume operations. But the fire left the Union Mine deeply in debt. Combined with falling ore quality, rising costs, and collapsing markets, the numbers no longer worked. In October 1879, the Union Mine was abandoned. On the evening of November 20th, the workers of Cerro Gordo gathered around Baudry's smelter for what they called the funeral. The blast was shut off. The furnace exhaled steam for the final time. The next day, one of Nadeau's mule teams hauled its last load down the yellow grade, 280 bars of base bullion and a 420-pound mass of pure silver, rumbling downward to the familiar jingling of team bells. Cerro Gordo, with a last gasp, died after 14 years of existence. The town did not empty immediately. Some miners stayed, working smaller operations, processing ore from the dumps, hoping for a revival. But the energy was gone. The belief was gone. By 1880, only a few dozen people remained. The saloons closed. The brothels shut down. The American hotel stayed open, serving occasional travelers and caretakers, but the crowds never returned. For the workers, the collapse was devastating. Men who had spent years saving money lost everything when the bank failed. Miners who had invested in claims or equipment found themselves holding worthless assets. Chinese laborers, always the most vulnerable, simply disappeared from the historical record. We do not know where they went or what happened to them. They were not important enough to track. Families packed what they could carry and left. Some went to other mining camps. Some returned east. Some disappeared into the vastness of the American West, their stories lost to history. The population that had peaked at 4,700 dropped to dozens, then to almost nothing. The physical town began to decay immediately. Without maintenance, structures collapsed, windows broke, roofs fell in. The desert wind and winter snow reclaimed what humans had built. Within 5 years, Cerro Gordo looked like it had been abandoned for decades. But perhaps the cruelest irony was this: the silver was still there. The Union Mine had not been exhausted. It had been abandoned because it was no longer profitable to extract what remained. The richest, easiest ore was gone, but vast quantities of lower-grade silver still existed in the rock. With different market conditions, better technology, or cheaper labor, the mine could have continued operating for decades. Instead, it became a tomb. The tunnels filled with water, equipment rusted, timbers rotted. The 30 Chinese miners trapped in the collapsed shaft stayed where they had died, their bones still resting in the darkness. This was the American boom-and-bust economy in its purest form. Cerro Gordo was not killed by lack of resources. It was killed by the calculus of profit. When the numbers stopped working, the mine closed, the workers were discarded, and the town died. Simple as that. Brutal as that. And yet, the story does not end in 1879. because even dead things can be resurrected if there is profit in it. For 2 decades, Kerugordo lay mostly silent. A handful of caretakers remained. Occasional prospectors poked through the old workings, hoping to find something the original miners had missed. Scavengers stripped equipment from abandoned buildings. The mountain began to look like a ruin, not a town. Then, in 1905, zinc prices spiked. Louis D. Gordon recognized what others had missed. The same ore that had been mined for silver also contained significant quantities of zinc carbonate. In the 1870s, zinc had little commercial value. But by the early 1900s, industrial demand had increased dramatically. Zinc was essential for galvanizing steel, manufacturing brass, producing batteries. American factories needed zinc, and Cerro Gordo had it. Gordon acquired rights to the old mines and began a new operation. He sank the Belshaw shaft to 900 feet, far deeper than the original silver miners had gone. At that depth, he found high-grade zinc ore in quantities that exceeded expectations. By 1907, zinc shipments from Cerro Gordo had resumed. By 1912, the town was the largest producer of zinc carbonates in the United States. This was Cerro Gordo's second boom. It was smaller than the first, quieter, less violent, but it brought the mountain back to life. Gordon built a bucket tramway from the Union Dump down the side of the Inyo Range to deposit ore in freight cars at Keeler, the town that had grown at the base of the mountain. The tramway was an engineering marvel, spanning miles of rough terrain, capable of moving tons of ore per day without requiring mule teams or freight wagons. In 1916, the town was electrified, replacing the steam power that had operated machinery for decades. But the workforce was different this time. Smaller, more specialized. At its peak, the zinc operation employed perhaps a few hundred men, not thousands. The town never regained its former population. Most workers lived in Keeler and commuted up the mountain. Cerro Gordo became a work site, not a community. The violence declined. There were no more weekly murders, no more gunfights in the streets. Partly this was because law enforcement had improved. Partly it was because the desperate, lawless energy of the early days was gone. The zinc miners were employees, not fortune seekers. They worked for wages, not dreams. By 1920, only 10 men were employed at Cerro Gordo. Production continued at a reduced scale. In 1924, workers processed silver-lead ore from old dumps using concentration and flotation techniques at the Keeler mill. Every scrap of value was being squeezed from the mountain. And then, quietly, without drama, the mines closed again. By 1938, mining had largely ceased. The zinc market had softened, costs had risen. The ore that remained was too difficult to access profitably. The same calculation that had killed Kerugordo in 1879 killed it again in 1938. This time there was no resurrection. The last permanent residents left. The buildings stood empty, the machinery rusted, the tunnels flooded. Cerro Gordo became what it remains today, a ghost town. But even in death, the mountain attracted attention. In the 1950s and 60s, historians and preservationists recognized Cerro Gordo's significance. The town represented a crucial chapter in California's development, the foundation upon which Los Angeles was built. But preservation efforts were minimal. The site was privately owned, passed between families and investors who had various plans for it, none of which materialized. In 2018, entrepreneurs Brent Underwood and John Beer purchased the entire ghost town for $4 million. Their plan was to restore the historic buildings and turn Cerro Gordo into a tourist destination while preserving its authenticity. They began renovations. They explored the mines. They documented the town's history on social media, attracting thousands of followers fascinated by the abandoned silver empire. Then, on June 15, 2020, exactly 149 years to the day after the American Hotel first opened, fire destroyed the historic building. An old electrical wire combined with century-old newspapers stuffed in the walls for insulation caused the hotel to go up like kindling. The fire spread to neighboring structures. The ice house burned. Residences burned. The town that had survived abandonment, weather, and time nearly disappeared entirely. Underwood and his team rebuilt. The American Hotel was reconstructed in 2025, using original plans and whatever materials could be salvaged. Other buildings were stabilized. Tours resumed. Cerro Gordo began attracting visitors again, people drawn by its history, its isolation, its haunting beauty. But it remains a ghost town. 20 structures from the original 400, 30 miles of flooded tunnels beneath the surface, 30 Chinese miners still entombed where they died, the Belshaw house leaning to one side, the smelter chimneys standing like gravestones in the desert wind. To visit Cerro Gordo now is to confront a question that has no easy answer. The road is still there, the yellow grade that Mortimer Belshaw carved through yellow rock in 1868. It is unpaved, rough, steep, and dangerous. Four-wheel drive vehicles recommended, high clearance essential. The journey from Highway 136 takes nearly an hour, climbing from the valley floor at 600 feet to the town at 500 feet. As you ascend, the air thins. The temperature drops. The landscape changes from desert scrub to scattered pinyon and juniper, though far fewer trees than existed before Cerro Gordo stripped the mountain bare. At the top, the town appears suddenly. Weathered buildings clinging to a steep slope. Rusted mining equipment scattered like toys. The foundations of structures that no longer exist. Everywhere, the evidence of what was. The American Hotel dominates the town site. Reconstructed to match its 1871 appearance, it offers overnight accommodations for visitors willing to make the journey. Inside, the rooms are furnished with period-appropriate furniture. Antiques salvaged from the original hotel and other buildings. Photographs on the walls showing Cerro Gordo in its prime. It feels like living in a museum, which in many ways, it is. Walk the streets, and you will see the Belshaw House, still standing after more than 150 years. The Gordon House, built in 1909. The Bunkhouse from 1904. A small theater where films were shown to miners. The assay office, frozen in time, its shelves still holding dusty bottles and instruments. The general store, its walls covered with old advertisements. And everywhere the mines, shafts descending into darkness. Tunnels sealed with iron gates to prevent people from entering and never returning. Adits drilled into the mountainside, leading to passages that extend for miles. Warning signs caution against entry. The ground is unstable. The air is toxic. People die in abandoned mines every year. Cerro Gordo's mines have already claimed enough lives. The view from Cerro Gordo is extraordinary. To the east, the Owens Valley stretches out like a map. Owens Lake, now mostly dry due to Los Angeles diverting its water sources in the early 1900s, sits at the base of the mountain as a white alkali flat. Keeler is visible, a tiny cluster of buildings. Beyond that, the White Mountains rise in the distance. To the west, the Sierra Nevada dominates the horizon. Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the contiguous United States at 14,505 feet, is clearly visible on clear days. The juxtaposition is stark, the highest and the deepest points in North America, visible from a mountain that once held economic power over an entire region. But what about the people? Does anyone actually live in Cerro Gordo now? Robert Desmarais served as the town's caretaker for more than 20 years before the 2018 sale. He lived alone on the mountain, maintaining the buildings, giving occasional tours, protecting the site from vandals and treasure hunters. He loved Cerro Gordo with the devotion of someone who had given his life to preserving something most people had forgotten. When Brent Underwood and his team purchased the town, Desmarais continued working with them, sharing his knowledge, helping with restoration efforts. Today, Underwood lives in Cerro Gordo part-time, managing the restoration project and hosting visitors. He documents the process on social media, sharing stories of discovery, old photographs found in walls, artifacts uncovered in mine tunnels, evidence of the thousands of people who once called this mountain home. His goal is preservation, not development, to maintain Cerro Gordo as a living historical site rather than letting it crumble into complete ruin. But preservation is expensive. The buildings require constant maintenance. Winter storms damage roofs. Summer heat warps wood. Vandals occasionally break in and steal artifacts. Insurance is nearly impossible to obtain given the remote location and fire risk. Electricity comes from solar panels and generators. Water is still hauled up the mountain just as it was in the 1870s. Internet is satellite-based and unreliable. This is the economic reality of preserving America's ghost towns. They cost more to maintain than they generate in revenue. They exist because individuals care enough to subsidize their existence. Without that care, they disappear. Environmentally, the mountain bears scars that will never fully heal. The tunnels beneath Cerro Gordo contain millions of gallons of contaminated water. Lead, silver, zinc, and other heavy metals leach into the groundwater. The EPA has never conducted a comprehensive study of the contamination, but the scale is almost certainly significant. The trees that were clear-cut in the 1870s have grown back partially, but the ecosystem is fundamentally altered. Legally, Cerro Gordo sits in a gray zone. It is private property, but the mines themselves may have complicated claim status. Mineral rights and surface rights are often separate in Western mining country. Abandoned mines present liability issues. If someone enters a shaft on your property and dies, you may be held responsible. This makes ghost town ownership legally complex and financially risky. Politically, Cerro Gordo represents a larger question California has never fully answered. What do we do with the remains of our extractive economy? The state is dotted with thousands of abandoned mines. Some are tourist attractions. Some are environmental disasters. Some are both. California's Division of Mine Reclamation estimates there are 47 Urozern abandoned mine sites in the state. Many contain toxic waste. Many pose physical dangers. Most are simply forgotten. Cerro Gordo is unusual because it is relatively intact and someone is actively working to preserve it. Most ghost towns do not have that luxury. They simply disappear, reclaimed by the desert, their stories lost. Stand on the porch of the American Hotel at dawn. Watch the sun rise over the White Mountains, casting long shadows across the Owens Valley. The wind moves through the empty streets. The old smelter chimneys stand silent. The mines wait in the darkness below your feet. This is what remains of an empire that built Los Angeles. Cerro Gordo is not just a ghost town. It is a mirror reflecting fundamental truths about American capitalism, about how we build wealth, who profits from that wealth, and what we leave behind when the wealth is gone. First, consider the economic model. Cerro Gordo existed for one purpose: to extract silver from the mountain and convert it into capital. Everything else, the town, the people, the infrastructure, was subordinate to that goal. When extraction was profitable, the town thrived. When extraction became unprofitable, the town died. The human cost was irrelevant to the calculation. The miners who died in cave-ins, the Chinese workers entombed in collapsed tunnels, the families displaced when the economy collapsed. None of this affected the decision to abandon operations. They were externalities, costs that did not appear on any balance sheet. This is not unique to Cerro Gordo. This is the pattern of American economic expansion. Resource extraction zones are created, exploited, and abandoned according to the logic of profit. Coal towns in Appalachia, copper towns in Montana, oil towns in Texas and North Dakota. The cycle repeats across geography and time. Boom, extraction, bust, abandonment. Second, consider the labor. The men who actually dug silver from Cerro Gordo earned $3 a day for 12-hour shifts in conditions that killed them regularly. The men who owned the mines earned fortunes. Victor Beaudry died wealthy. Mortimer Belshaw lived comfortably in San Francisco. Remy Nadeau became one of Los Angeles's leading businessmen. The workers died in the mines or left with nothing. This wealth disparity was not a failure of the system. It was the system. Cerro Gordo operated on the principle that labor should be compensated at the minimum rate necessary to prevent rebellion or complete workforce collapse. Everything above that minimum went to capital. When workers complained, they were fired and replaced. When they organized, they were threatened. When they died, the mine continued operating. We can see this dynamic playing out across America today. Amazon warehouse workers, gig economy drivers, fast food employees, agricultural laborers. The names change, The technology changes. The fundamental relationship between labor and capital remains identical to what existed at Cerro Gordo in 1871. Third, consider the environmental cost. Cerro Gordo stripped forests from the Inyo Mountains, diverted water sources, left millions of gallons of contaminated water in underground tunnels, created toxic waste sites that will persist for centuries. None of this was factored into the profit calculation. The environment was treated as an infinite resource that could be consumed without consequence. We are still living with that assumption. Climate change, water depletion, soil degradation, plastic pollution. The same logic that stripped Cerro Gordo bare now operates at a global scale. The difference is merely scope, not philosophy. Fourth, consider the social structure. Cerro Gordo was stratified by race, class, and origin. White miners earned more than Chinese miners for identical work. Property owners lived in comfort while laborers slept in tents. Mexican miners who discovered the silver were quickly displaced by American businessmen who controlled the infrastructure. This was not accidental. This was social engineering designed to maximize profit by creating divisions that prevented unified worker action. This pattern persists. Income inequality in America today exceeds what existed during the Gilded Age. The racial wealth gap remains enormous. Class mobility has declined. Cerro Gordo in 1873 and America in 2025 share more similarities than most people would like to admit. Fifth, consider the violence. Cerro Gordo averaged 1 murder per week. Violence was not prosecuted systematically. The strong dominated the weak. This was seen as acceptable because maintaining order was expensive, and expense reduced profit. The town existed in a state of managed chaos where violence was simply a cost of doing business. Is this so different from modern America? Our incarceration rate is the highest in the world. Gun violence is endemic. Poverty is enforced through police power. We have simply outsourced the violence to institutions that make it less visible. Sixth, and perhaps most importantly, consider the disposability. When Cerro Gordo was no longer profitable, it was simply abandoned. No one asked what would happen to the workers. No one planned for transition. No one took responsibility for the mess left behind. The capitalists moved on to the next opportunity. The workers were left to fend for themselves. This is the recurring pattern of American capitalism. Communities are built around industries. When the industries leave, the communities collapse. Detroit, Youngstown, countless mill towns, mining towns, manufacturing towns. The same cycle, the same abandonment, the same lack of responsibility. Cerro Gordo reveals that this is not a bug in the system. This is the system working exactly as designed. But there are other readings of this history. Some people look at Cerro Gordo and see human ingenuity. They see men overcoming incredible obstacles to extract wealth from a hostile environment. They see the development of Los Angeles as proof that Cerro Gordo's sacrifice was worth it. They argue that economic growth requires risk, requires exploitation of resources, requires winners and losers. Some see Cerro Gordo as a cautionary tale about sustainability, a warning that extraction economies eventually consume themselves, a reminder that natural resources are finite and environmental costs are real. Some see it simply as history, a chapter in California's development. Interesting, but not particularly relevant to today's concerns. A tourist attraction, a curiosity, a place where you can buy a t-shirt and take photos of abandoned buildings. All of these readings contain truth, but they miss something essential. Cerro Gordo is not just history, it is prophecy. The same forces that built Cerro Gordo and destroyed it are operating now. Extraction economies that consume resources and discard workers. Wealth concentration that enriches a few while impoverishing many. Environmental destruction treated as an externality. Communities built on unstable economic foundations. The belief that growth can continue forever if we just find the next silver mountain. We are all living in Cerro Gordo now. We just don't realize it yet. The question is not whether we will end up like Cerro Gordo. The question is what we will do when we realize we are already there. Will we rebuild? Will we preserve what remains? Or will we simply move on to the next opportunity, leaving the ruins behind? The wind moves through Cerro Gordo like a slow exhalation. Stand at the edge of the town, looking out over the Owens Valley, and you can see the entire arc of American ambition laid out before you. The high peaks, the deep valleys, the places where men believed they could extract infinite wealth from finite land, the places where they were right for a moment, the places where they were catastrophically wrong. 20 structures remain from 400. The American Hotel, rebuilt after burning, serves visitors who want to experience what it felt like to live at 500 feet in a place where men killed each other weekly over silver and pride. The Belshaw House leans slightly to one side, 157 years old, defying gravity and time. The general store sells nothing now, its shelves empty except for dust and memory. Beneath the surface, 30 miles of tunnels wind through the mountain. Some are flooded. Some have collapsed. Some remain accessible, though dangerous. The 30 Chinese miners still rest in the darkness where a tunnel collapsed in the 1870s. No one went down to retrieve them. No one ever will. They have become part of Cerro Gordo, their bones mineralized by time and water, their names lost to history. This is what we leave behind, not just buildings and equipment, but people, bones in abandoned shafts, names erased from record, lives that mattered to someone somewhere, reduced to statistics or forgotten entirely. Los Angeles sprawls across the coastal plain, home to 13 million people, one of the largest metropolitan areas on Earth. Few of its residents know that their city was built on Cerro Gordo's silver, that without the Fat Hill, Los Angeles would have remained a dusty pueblo, forgotten on the map of westward expansion. The connection has been severed, the debt forgotten. Cerro Gordo gave Los Angeles its life. Los Angeles took that gift and moved on without looking back. This is the American story. Build something from nothing. Extract everything possible. Discard what remains. Move forward. Never look back. Convince yourself that this time it will be different. That this boom will last. That the mountain will never run out. That the workers are being treated fairly. That the environmental costs are manageable. That someone else will clean up the mess. Until the mountain runs out. Until the workers are discarded. Until the environment collapses. Until you realize that everything you built was temporary, fragile, dependent on conditions that could not last. Then, you abandon the mountain. You leave it to the wind and the silence. You tell yourself it was necessary, that it was progress, that it was worth it. And maybe it was. Maybe the cost of 13 million people living in Los Angeles justifies the abandoned town on the mountain. Maybe the silver that built banks and businesses and schools justifies the miners who died digging it from the ground. Maybe the wealth that flowed from Cerro Gordo justifies the poverty left behind when the wealth stopped flowing. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe there was another way. Maybe we could have built Los Angeles without destroying Cerro Gordo. Maybe we could have extracted silver without killing miners. Maybe we could have created wealth without such catastrophic inequality. But we didn't. This is what we did instead. And we are still doing it. Places like Cerro Gordo are not just ruins. They are questions we keep asking, and rarely answer honestly. How much are we willing to sacrifice for economic growth? Who benefits from that sacrifice? Who pays the cost? What will be left behind when the boom ends? Stand in Cerro Gordo long enough, and you realize the town is not asking these questions. You are. The wind moves through empty streets. The smelter chimneys stand like gravestones. The mines wait in the darkness. The mountain does not judge. It does not accuse. It simply exists, bearing the scars we carved into it, holding the bones we left behind, waiting for the next person who climbs the yellow grade to look around and ask, what happened here, and why? If you would like to see more stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to Forgotten America Stories, and tell me in the comments which forgotten city or abandoned empire I should explore next. These investigations into America's hidden history are only possible with your support. The wind keeps blowing. The silence keeps waiting. The mountain remembers everything we have forgotten,